Kind of sound radio. We're tuning in to change.
Hello and welcome to Kinda Sound Radio. You're here with me, your host, Juliette Bryant, and this is Transformative Health. And I'm very, very excited today because there are two amazing people, not just one, but two. The Seed Sisters are on my show. Kaz and Fee are the Seed Sisters. They're herbalists, they're authors, and eco-activists. And they run social enterprise called the Sensory Solution Herbal Evolution. What a name, that's amazing. They've got 2 books and they speak at conferences around the world and run programs for learning about herbs with online and in-person courses. Their passion is connecting people back into the medicine of the plant world that grows all around us. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's really nice to be here.
I heard you talk, Kaz, a few years ago at an event that I was speaking at, and it was beautiful to hear someone so connected to the earth and so in touch with the plants, but not just on a physical level, but on that deeper energetic level. And I imagine, Fee, I've not had the blessing to meet you yet, but I hope I get to. I'm sure that as you're teamed up together, you have a similar ethos.
Yeah, we've worked for it's coming up 25 years together now. So although we were both interested in plants and herbalism from our early teens before we met, we've really grown up and developed our practices together and had that continuation of support through our clinical practices, through the way that we connect and work with the land. And yeah, I think we're coming from a pretty similar place.
Amazing. And what brought you both together?
Well, we met while studying on a degree. We were both very passionate about plants, and when we found out you could actually study to get a formal qualification here in the UK, we ended up in Ponders End, of all places, in North London, studying at Middlesex University on the phytotherapy or 4-year BSc programme.
Brilliant. And it's obviously taken you guys on an amazing journey over the last 25 years together. What would you say, and this is probably a very general question that might be hard to answer, but of that time together, what's been your highlight or a few highlights of that time working together?
I think one of the highlights has been we spent our student loan on an Airstream caravan. So we went and put some money into like an exchange place, and like several months later, wondering if anything was going to materialize, our beautiful little Airstream caravan turned up on Southampton docks, and we kitted her out to travel around mainly the UK, but also abroad. So we basically plotted through working with people at different events and festivals and local arts events where the abundance of different herbs were across the UK, and from Wales to Scotland to Cornwall, and really seeing how the landscapes are so different and the plants are so different in different parts of the UK. And we'd both historically done a lot of traveling further afield and in Europe, but to really, really get to grips with our land here and understand that, apart from the many, many adventures that brought us along the way.
Yeah, it's a real highlight because, as Fee said, we've been working and traveling together for 25 years. And so every spring, summer sees us going off on a tour and meeting literally hundreds, maybe thousands of different people and plants. And over those years, it's really gratifying to see that more people actually are interested in herbal medicine. Because right at the beginning, our very first herb walk that we ever led, we were in a little town in Hertfordshire and we'd advertised this herb walk in the health food shop, and we were all excited. And one person turned up, and it was our mate.
She's also a herbalist.
Yeah. We were just like, oh, people aren't actually interested in this. And over the years, more and more people have kind of woken up to wanting health, freedom and autonomy, and understanding that the local weeds, because the more kind of exciting plants that come from further afield are kind of fashionable, like the ginsengs of the world or the echinaceas, but the nettle and the dandelion are often overlooked. And more people are realizing that they can actually go and pick them themselves. And I think the kind of fashion of foraging has done a lot for that as well. So that's exciting.
It's a beautiful thing. I've been running foraging walks for about 15 odd years. And again, the same thing, when I first started, there weren't many people interested. You get a few, but now there is such a resurgence of it. I think, with the whole mess that the world's been in the last few years, people are taking stock so much more of what's actually in my environment. And what I love about the foraging part is it brings people into the moment, that connection with nature and looking at what's actually right underneath our feet. There's such beauties, like, as you said, the nettles and the dandelions. There's such powerful medicine, mugwort, all around us for us to access. And that's why I think your books are so important that you guys have written. So your first book was the Sensory Herbal Handbook. What inspired you to do that one?
That was a culmination of things. So we started running an apprenticeship program. We called it an apprenticeship. It's over a year. It's 4 seasonal weekends where we meet in person. And on that course, we basically wanted people to be taught the way we wished we'd been taught. So not discounting the science, actually embracing the idea of the constituents and how the plants work, but also looking at what that might mean in terms of those more spiritual, emotional attributes of the herbs. I know that's the way you work with plants as well, that real interconnection of all of those things. And we felt like we were taught at university very disconnected from the plants, and we had to find that connection or maintain that connection ourselves. Going out, we'd have study groups for our course, and then we'd end up in the fields, making medicines and singing to the plants. And that real interpretation of working with the plants and what we learned directly from them, we wanted to share. And the apprenticeship program is basically the foundation of the book is the bones of that apprenticeship program, that kind of seasonal walk through the year, but also a how to connect with your local plants as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I just said we really wanted to empower people to make their own medicine, make their own remedies. So that's what we've done throughout the book. We've looked at, because when we work with herbal medicines, there's different ways of preserving them. And if you give people that kind of structure of how to make a tincture, how to make an infused oil, how to make a flower essence, how to dry for powders, you can then, they're transferable skills to the other plants, especially if you've got that. We've created a structure where observation, because obviously it's really important you get the right plant, and often when people are starting out, that's one of the biggest fears. How do I know that this is correct? So within sensory herbalism, which is something that our ancestors have practiced since the dawn of time, tapping into our own senses, and to do that you have to be slow, because we're in a really fast-paced world at the moment, and nature gives us the ability to slow right down and take note of the fine details so that you don't make mistakes. So that kind of drive, like what we often say, we do what we do because we're quite angry, we're rageful, because the way the world isn't very nice, especially not to nature, and we are part of nature. And if we can empower people to take care of themselves with the weeds and the plants that they recognise, they'll wake up and realise that these are really important. Let's take care of them as well.
That's so beautiful. It's very similar to my kind of mission statement, is to connect people into the earth, and through that they remember who they are, part of this incredible planet. And I think it's that disconnect, isn't it? That separation of thinking that we're separate beings and not part of this, you know, incredible planet where there's elderberries and hawthorn flowers and, you know, all of these beautiful things around us. So I think what you're doing is so important and needed. And I think, as you said, that empowerment of people is the key. You know, not just saying, oh, you could take this remedy or take this, but actually that skill that we all used to have of being able to make stuff from the bounty that nature provides us all the time, and done in that respectful way. I think that's so important, that part of it, you know, done with reverence to the plants and in connection, soul connection, so that you can start to really take those remedies to a deeper level.
Yeah, and we, you know, that idea that we are the pollinate, we can be the pollinators as well. We can be the seed distributors through walking and getting sticky buds stuck to us and shaking it off, or nibbling on rose hips and chucking away the hairy seeds, or whatever it might be, that we are part of that, or can be again part of that ecosystem of our wild spaces. And yeah, that, you know, that's what we set the intention for our work, was to try and change the current paradigm here of society, this dependence on external healthcare, and that, you know, the NHS here in the UK, the free healthcare system, has almost eaten itself because people walk past those useful plants for sore throats, or, you know, simple things, and go and take up time of a GP, which could be better spent on some of the more complex health issues, or where blood tests are needed, or whatever it might be. And yeah, just sort of readdressing the balance of this dependency. And also, if you're your first port of call for healthcare, then you want to take more care of yourself, you know, inevitably.
And I think what I've seen is that countries where they don't have a free system of healthcare do take a little bit more precaution and work with things as preventatives. But in this country, I think people have got lazy, because it's like, well, I'll just go to the doctor and get a pill and I don't have to do anything. I think it's that I don't want to do anything. I don't want to make changes to my lifestyle. I just want something that's going to cover up the issue. I'm drinking a tea right now because I sang for 16 hours yesterday from sunrise to sunset for Beltane along the Michael line. So my throat is a little bit raspy. So I've got rosemary, sage and thyme in a tea right now. And it's doing wonders.
Perfect. Yeah, and the rosemary, you know, in flower, has been through the winters, you know, such a powerhouse of health and loveliness. Yeah.
Definitely. So I've been reading this book here, your latest book, Poison Prescriptions, and it's amazing. I absolutely love it. And what an incredible job you guys have done. What inspired you guys to write this book?
Thank you for that lovely compliment. That's very easy. The plants inspired us because the plants literally turned up. We didn't plant them, they turned up. We had an avocado plant right outside a south-facing wall, and a henbane self-seeded in the avocado. Datura self-seeded in the front garden, and then the next year in the back. And belladonna turned up. We went on a holiday away, and a huge belladonna was growing in the steps of a cathedral under a full moon. So the Solanaceae sisters just walked into our lives. And when plants do that, when I think people will relate to, sometimes you notice a plant or a tree and you become curious about that plant or tree. And these particular plants have been revered in human culture all over the world, and they're super powerful. They've been there at the kind of warfare. They've been there as murderers' plants of choice. They were there at the beginning of surgery with anesthesia. They're incredible pain relief plants. And they're woven into this beautiful, very spiritual narrative that humankind have lived with them. And there's been a war waged on them alongside the war waged on women. And the word witch, which is a huge word with lots of different interpretations, there's this energy of suppression and oppression that goes along with them that we really wanted to open our voices and share the knowledge that we are very privileged to have about those plants. So, and it was actually a wonderful man whose name is Nick Rowley. And Nick Rowley was one of the group of people that designed the herbal medicine degree programme. I don't know when it was. It might have been the late 80s or 90s when they were doing that. And he invited us to come and do a series of podcasts for Heartwood Herbal Medicine Charity. And when we were doing them about these plants, he was like, "You've got to write this book." So he really encouraged us to do it.
Amazing.
Yeah, those special plants that get called the witching herbs or the poisons were plants that we were very privileged to have been taught about for working with in clinical practice. Because what we have seen is that some of the former generation of herbalists worked with these plants a lot, especially pre the Medicines Act, the 1968 Medicines Act, and that they sort of died out of fashion as they became part of this restricted schedule, which meant that only practitioners can work with them. What constitutes a practitioner isn't defined here in the UK, but the legislation is that they are practitioner only, which all of a sudden starts to make people wary about working with them, even though there's very obvious parameters that are outlined within those schedules. And we were studying in the period of time where on Camden Market you could go and buy pots of magic mushrooms, cubensis mushrooms, and philosopher's stones and things just on every stall, because dried mushrooms were classed as illegal and fresh mushrooms weren't. So there was this huge kind of influx of people growing mushrooms and people having access to mind-altering mushrooms. And suddenly the legislation changed to say that anything that was mind-altering was classified as illegal. And we became aware that we were in this privileged position of having worked really magically with these herbs and also with them in clinical practice. These herbs that have this powerful potential for medicine, but also this powerful potential for harm. And in between all of that, this kind of magical, mystical area where they bring forth so much intrigue and mysticism and the weight of all of this history connected with them. And it was just this privileged opportunity to be able to reintroduce them back to herbalists for clinical practice, and talk about their more magical properties and how those two things aren't necessarily disconnected or don't have to be. So the Poison Prescriptions book was this culmination of work within clinical practice and within clinical practice more magically as well, because we don't separate those two things. We do a lot of rites and rituals and a lot of working with individual herbs with people, as well as here's a mix to help symptomology or whatever else it might be.
It's something that I think is so remarkable, the the way that society has drummed in fear. I think that's what it really is. It's fear of plants, it's fear of, and obviously there are things deadly, and we have to have a great respect for nature and for everything that she gifts us. But I think anything, so many things like the mind-altering things have been taken out of people's reach because they are there to potentially open us up to the interconnectedness of all things, and that is not what is wanted, that interconnectedness. And yet you look at things like foxglove and all of these are used by pharmaceutical companies to make preparations, but for people they're told to stay away because they're deadly.
Yes, there's a lot of control, and as I said about the suppression and the oppression, and fear extends to fear of women as well. Women have been feared because of our ability to bleed and give birth and hold a lot of that creatrix energy. Women have been demonized, and the magic, so we always talk about magic as being imagination. You've got the words combining there as well, and being able to tap into our imagination and see and vision and work towards creating something with a lot more equality is where all of this work is kind of aligning. And yeah, we talk about fear as an emotion that originates from the kidneys, because we like to look at all of the wisdom traditions and cultural information that we've got, and fear resides there. So when we work with that emotion, we're looking at herbs that support the kidneys as well. And when we talk within the book about how to actually apply these herbs, that, yes, in certain doses are deadly, but you have nuance and you have ideas of how to support all of your other organs in your system, how to look after yourself when you are going to embark on, let's say, astral flight or some kind of much deeper meditation. You don't just jump off an edge. You think about how am I going to stay warm? How can I look after all of my body and my mind? So it's a lot more full. We have had, it was quite interesting because the publishers said, or came back from an American distribution area saying, oh, we can't stock that book because it's called Poison Prescriptions, and we're worried that maybe teenagers that want to harm themselves might take that book and do harm with it. And it was something that we kind of sat back and thought really deeply about, like, how can you put something out into the world that is extremely potent and powerful and hold it in safety? And the way that we know about is magical intention. So that's what we've infused into the book. But society is scared. They're deeply scared.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of that legislation actually is what protects those people, because, we know that they're on a list of this schedule that's, on the 1968 Medicines Act, the Schedule 20 herbs. And, we know that because we're herbalists. But, Joe Public doesn't know that. And I mean, I've seen a child with a Brugmansia flower, the kind of tree daturas that originate from the Americas, from South America, and they with their child holding one of those flowers in its hand. I mean, extremely risky were it to bite into that, or even through the skin. And people don't know the power of those plants, and legislating them in that way doesn't provide the education. Whereas the wish for that book is that the seeds of the knowledge and the inspiration is out there so that people can make these informed choices. I mean, we don't encourage anyone with these plants to be taking huge, big, posh doses of them. And again, that's another facet of society that we've tried to troubleshoot or tap into to try and say, not everything has to be approached with this
Greed.
consuming kind of way that we've been brought up with, that we consume, and
All is beautiful.
Yeah, let's take a more measured approach with connecting with nature, because it's not as diverse and abundant as it once was. So
And also, one of the things that I do quite a lot with plants is I don't even ingest them. I just sit with them and work with the spirit of the plant. And that's such a powerful thing.
Absolutely.
I became intolerant to cacao a while ago, and it was something that I loved. And I thought, how can I actually have cacao when my body is saying, don't touch it, and we're going to give you hives every time we do? So I just sat and called in the spirit of cacao and had the same heart-opening, beautiful feeling. So it's the same, I think, with anything if we're taught. And I think that's what's so lovely about your book is you do guide people in rituals and different ways to work with them, not just consuming them internally.
Yeah, we held a ritual on summer solstice in 2019. We were invited to a conference in Prague, and Prague is the city of thresholds. That it translates Praha as threshold. And we were talking about belladonna particularly, and belladonna's full name, her botanical name, is Atropa belladonna, named for Atropos, who is one of the weird sisters, the three sisters, and she actually cuts the thread of life. So we cursed capitalism and cut the threads of consumerism, and that's still work that we regularly practice. But when everything went haywire in early 2020,
a few months later,
we, we were like, right, okay,
Wow. So can we blame it all on you? No.
belladonna.
or
Yeah.
Prague, the heart of Europe, seen as the landscape. They think maybe a meteor or something hit and created this rose formation in the land that Prague's kind of in the center of. So it's also seen as the kind of heart of the landscape. So it was just a very, confluence of events maybe that came together.
But we have been calling for change since we were aware. We've both come from protesting backgrounds. I was on the road protest at 16 years old. And as I said, we're really angry. And protest has become problematic in this country. And it puts, we've been face to face with violence and aggression on the front line. And we chose consciously, I don't know, maybe 20, 15 years ago, to do the work in a different way, more magically, and try to put out more education. But it's so important to hold that line and to keep resisting and pushing back, because consumerism is an illness. It's like an addiction where people, I walk into some shops sometimes and I'm like, ooh, shiny, pretty things, because they make it all so like just beautiful, don't they? They make everything beautiful, and it makes you feel like you need it. And the reality is we don't need any of that stuff. And all of that stuff is contributing to the death and destruction of nature around us. And it's indescribably sad.
Yeah. I think what you said, about doing things in a magical way is so important, because that's what they're doing. All of the powers that be are employing magical skills. They announce things on power days. They work on the energy grids and the ley lines. That's why we were singing for 16 hours from the Tor to Bury St Edmunds and lots of the points in between, because this is what they're doing in other ways. So to counter magic, you need to counter it with magic, and they're using all this subliminal trickery in ads and everything else to make us want to consume. But what I've seen is, when you get people out gathering herbs and gathering, it takes that place, it fulfills that need. And I think part of it comes from that hunter-gatherer time when women went out and gathered. And so because we're not in a world where we can gather anymore, well, we can, but where it's programmed that we don't gather, what people do is they gather clothes and makeup and accessories because they have that in them, that desire to go and forage and collect.
Yeah, and it's so true, isn't it? When you get a group together and you collect together. I also love it when you have your dried herb and you strip the herb together. And we often sit in circle with people and strip the herb. And when you're working with aromatics like lavender, for example, the scent just fills the space and it feels like time traveling because that's what people have done together forever. And it feels so special. And it does fill any empty spaces within.
And we always say that any ritual or anything that has been developed through history is in response to the people and the place and the plants, and that there is absolutely no reason why we can't take remnants of what's been done before or whispers that we might have of what's been done, but create modern rituals and that apply or are appealing to cross generations now. And at the heart of it is just coming together, celebrating, connecting over something, a thread, which most often for us is centered around the plants.
But they're such an
yeah.
important part of it all, aren't they? That they're what sustains our life.
They are what sustains our life.
And create those gathering spaces, something so profound about being in those more natural spaces, than sitting on concrete or whatever, for example. And
definitely, I think more natural spaces. We have a few friends who have created permaculture forest gardens, and that's such a beautiful concept, the permaculture forest garden, and planting in the canopy and all the different layers is such a magical thing when you see this, not the monoculture that we've been programmed with, but this beautiful array of things all growing together. And I know you guys have a growing project, don't you?
Yeah, we do. We've got a community orchard and community gardens, and it's something. So we are a social enterprise, and that's a kind of type, a structure of business that's a community interest company. So we give grants every year to other community gardens. They're medicine garden grants. So we also have like a series of different educational bits and bobs to help people to grow medicine together. Because it's the way that we see moving through whatever is coming our way. We all know that there's stuff coming. But by forging community links and growing food and medicine together, we're strengthening communities. And I liked the fact that you mentioned this whole radio is all about kindness at its core, because that's something that it became our mantra after or during the pandemic. In times of chaos, kindness is key.
Yeah.
And having a kindness economy and working with growers, and there's this huge problem of loneliness throughout our country as well. And like we just imagine every single village, town, city having resourced of community gardens, and people can come together and put in as much or as little as they can, but have this space that isn't just the monoculture of boring agriculture.
And kindness is definitely needed in those instances because you get so many different characters coming together, and patience and understanding and, almost having a space for people to be able to vent, but being able to hold that and then move on from it. And it's they're all like experiments in sort of human nature and how those spaces can contain and hold that for people with a shared focus that brings everyone back together.
And I think, ultimately with spaces like that, there may be the friction sometimes of people coming together, but ultimately I feel the earth is holding it underneath it all and helping to smooth out those kind of ruffles by holding that space, and the different plants in there again are energetically creating the space for people to reconnect with who they are.
Yeah, Yeah, no, it's true. And, the biggest friction we've seen is again through greed and consumerism. It's only when people want to land grab and stop those spaces from actually
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
Because there's lots of re-education that happens because most the kind of dominant paradigm talks about things like weed killers the norm, and when people come into a community growing space, some of them have been used to allotments where they use whatever fertilizers and weed killers, and we're really keen to keep things organic and natural. So that's been almost the hardest thing to navigate, but it helps because it's an opportunity for re-education.
wow, that's so interesting that that's been one of the hardest things that you've had to overcome is actually, organic, which is how it's always been done. And there's so much evidence now about the danger of pesticides and fungicides and herbicides on the soil and also the bacteria in the wildlife.
Mm.
Whatever your viewpoint is, though, you can find information to back that up in the modern day, so I mean, there's one project that we never actually got off the ground because one individual went in and literally weed killed the whole plot, knowing that that wasn't the ethos of the group, but went in and did it because that was his way. And in his mind, in 6 months, it's cleared from the soil, and that's that anyway. And that was just what he came in with, and that was going to be the way for him. And he backed that up with what evidence he'd found. And it was like, well,
What we've learned from that, because we've seen is that was more than one project, but what we've seen is the way mycoremediation works. So remediation with the mushrooms, in particular the mycelium, and how the land heals itself. And we've had the privilege to watch. It was so interesting. There was one patch that was completely weed killered, and it's now 9 years on, but I watched the first colonization was through dock. So yellow dock came in en masse, took over, and I really was so fascinated at what mycelium grow in conjunction with dock. And they've got really deep tap roots, so they're able to take up all of that toxicity from the soil. Um, they stayed for 3 years, and then the burdock came. So the bigger giant leafed burdocks arrived, and they've stayed for 3 years, and now there's nettle there in the ninth year. So it's been such it's a learning journey, isn't it? By observing how nature heals herself,
Yeah.
and nature's going to be here forever.
Exactly. It's just us that are going to be kicked off. It's like
Exactly.
when you see the old unused mines, as soon as people go, they can become the most incredible areas. And so quickly nature just colonizes because there is that law that wherever there is a void, it will be filled. So when we create these blank spaces in nature, nature will fill it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's so
yeah, and
beautiful.
there's a huge, a lot of it is experimentation at the minute as well. And there's been this thing about bashing out, I think they literally call it bashing the Himalayan balsam, which is also one of those ones that can come in really easily and really early and take over an area. But it's like, what's that doing to the soil? Is there regeneration that's going on with that? Yes, it's not a native and could take over like rhododendrons have done, but there's a certain level of allowing certain spaces to process and see what comes of it. And that's what's happening on a bit of land that we've got locally here, is tentatively starting to work with the land, but seeing how the land responds in the place of that as well.
And so often, I think the plants that are showing up have that deeper message of the energetics. It's like my father-in-law had loads of yarrow in his lawn when they moved, tons of it, was covered it. And he was like, I'm going to use weed killer. I was like, no, please we're never coming over and sitting in the grass ever again. And my littlest was only a baby, and I was like, he can't go on the grass if you put weed killer down and spray your lawn. It's not happening. And so we started to look into, well, maybe if you work with the yarrow and actually talk with it and drink some yarrow tea, it will help. So once he started talking to the yarrow and having yarrow tea, it disappeared. Because he had learnt the lesson that he needed to get from the yarrow. And I think that's one of the things that's so remarkable, is sometimes we have something in abundance because it's desperately trying to communicate with us that we actually need to work with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
So before we finish, we've got about 10 more minutes. I'd love to know from your book, I'd love to hear if you've got a story about each of the plants and how they have worked with someone, if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah. I've got a story about Datura, because this was a long time ago. One of my patients he was 8 years old at the time, a boy, an asthmatic boy, and he was on the blue puffer, so Ventolin, and also a brown puffer, which is a steroid inhaler. And he was quite sickly. He was developing a different kind of shape within his chest, because when people suffer with asthma, it's quite difficult for their lungs to be moving in the chest, and the whole bone structure and the ribs can change. And he was having regular asthma attacks. And I just learnt in clinic about Datura and asthma, and I made up a mix with only 3 drops of Datura in 100 mils of herbs. So that is a tiny, tiny dose. And it was just transformational for him. There was other herbs in there, of course, but it was a really interesting process for me to realise how small a dose of a plant is needed when you know that plant, you work with that plant, you talk to that plant, and you tell the plant, I'm going to put you in this bottle and you're going to be working with this little boy. And his family, and he's quite desperate as well, and it felt like an incredible gift. And to know that you can work with children with asthma with these plants that are called dangerous and toxic, and there's so much fear around them, is extremely empowering. And so that was my first realization. When you work as a clinical herbalist, you see amazing healing miracles on a daily basis, and it's very gratifying and exciting when patients come back and they are better. That's very, very exciting. Yeah, and he's a big man now. He's a teacher.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What a beautiful story.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I was just thinking, you said about every plant. I was thinking there is stories about every plant that's written in that book, but
maybe just
it would take a
maybe just the 3.
That's 25 years.
Belladonna and the my mind's just gone blank on the third one.
Henbane. There's another sort of clinically related story, actually, which links to the belladonna. And belladonna is one of the herbs that we can work with actually for hot flushes of perimenopause. And
I need some.
And what we often do in those kind of situations is, obviously as a herbalist, you're treating the whole being, and you're not just going in with, oh, you've got hot flushes, here's some belladonna. And I'd been working with someone who had an extremely taxing job, very demanding, mentally, emotionally, and was starting to get perimenopausal symptoms coming through. And we'd looked at supporting the liver, the nervous system, and she was a lot more able to cope. But it became very apparent that actually the job wasn't good for her. but there was also this pull. You could see she wasn't willing to give it up. So, when you know something in terms of a lifestyle that's really going to help someone, but they're just not ready, it's a difficult balance, the knowing of being the practitioner and how that's got to be nurtured in someone. And for it to be their choices, their life at the end of the day. And eventually, with the way the hot flushes were coming, we added belladonna into the mix. And it wasn't a large amount of belladonna. And the hot flushes almost immediately started to improve. And we did look at taking it out again, or I took it out of the mix just to see. And sure enough, they did come back. But actually, we talked about belladonna having a troper, was with these shears and could cut the thread of time, of life. She chose when things were at an end. And it wasn't long after working with the belladonna that this particular lady did actually decide enough was enough with the job, changed the job, and the whole perimenopausal process became a lot different for her in that, because there's so much demands on the adrenal glands and the body at that time. And her body had been saying, you need more space and time and energy, but it did very much feel like it was the energy of belladonna that enabled that cut. So it's interesting, you've got this kind of physical attribute of the belladonna, which is to help with these symptomology of the hot flushes, but actually what's going on there is that something needed to change. And the energy of the belladonna allowed that to happen.
Because belladonna is also one of the homeopathics that's very commonly used as well. For heat as well, it's that heat created when you're in that hot state of fever. Belladonna's the one that you would turn to quite
Break
often.
it with, yeah, creating that shift and that change. And we have seen actually with the homeopathic model that a lot of the energetics of the homeopathic can be transferred with the more energetic qualities of some of the herbs as well. When you put that,
it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? Ultimately, when you're breaking down the plant into that non-physical version, it is that energetic. It's still the same plant, isn't it? Yeah. Amazing. Kaz, do you want to tell us a story about the last one now?
The henbane.
Yeah.
Do
you have one?
I'm trying to think. I've got lots of stories. Henbane's what's so stunning. There's henbane flowers. I'm going to gender him as he, but it can be gendered as she as well. He's got these delicate, creamy flowers with purple veins. And then as you look into the flower, the deeper you go, the darker kind of purple he gets. And I went to Crete last year. I was lucky enough to get to the beautiful island of Crete, and there is a star fortress. They think a 14th century, might be even earlier, star fortress on the coast there. And star fortresses were built all over Europe in around that time, 1400s, and they are literally built like stars. They're incredible. And I've got a tattoo of one on my shoulder that Fiona did for me.
Wow.
Alchemical places. And in that fortress, it was all kind of all crumbly within it, like different old buildings. I found a load of henbane growing. And it's so exciting when you go out around and travel and you find familiar plants. And there was about 6 kids with me, and that was it for me. I was like dancing around the henbane, and they're like, "Oh, she's gone." But I collected some seeds from there, and they're just germinating right now in the greenhouse. But the henbane is a jovial spirit. Henbane is under the domain of Jupiter. And throughout the years, when we've worked with groups of people, we blindfold them, we give them a drop of blind herb. And when they take henbane and they come back round and discuss how they felt, it's like suddenly you're at a party. Everyone's talking, everyone's really animated, people are outwardly expressing. And it's always so interesting to us that henbane was the brewer's herb of choice. So nearly all of the beer that was brewed in Europe was brewed from henbane and other herbs. But it makes so much sense that henbane is just so opening and fun and tasty. And it was, the very first we got the
We have
brew.
our own personal henbane brewer.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it was changed to hops by design. That was the very first drugs law ever, and that happened, the Munich beer purity laws, because as a herbalist you'll know that hops is anti-testosteronic and a depressant. So to take out this jovial, fantastical plant was a very clever, controlling way of being.
Yeah.
And again, under the guise of protecting people.
Protection. Yeah.
Yeah. By just narrowing the knowledge and understanding of the complexity of plants that can be used to work with for brewing. So
have you brewed that? Do you brew it yourself?
no, we've got our own personal brewer.
Okay.
We call him Uncle Vic. But he brews henbane ale for us. And actually we work with this mainly we do a weekend retreat where we look into all of the individual herbs in the book, our native power plants retreat, and we work with the henbane beer on those retreats. So we have it once a year.
Amazing.
And
I want to come.
With it. Yeah, come. It's in September.
Amazing. So thank you so much. We're going to finish in a second with a song, but please tell people, where can they find you if they want to know more about the incredible work that you're doing?
Thank you. We've got a website, seedsistas.co.uk, because we're well cool. And so it's sisters with an AS on the end. And we've got a blog on there. We've actually got a members area that we call the Coven of Herbal Secrets, which is a really lovely place if you're interested in regular seasonal connection. And then we do our apprenticeship, which is a much deeper dive and a personal transformation. But there's like a pop-up comes up and you can get a free intro to herbs if you sign up for the newsletters. And every week we send out what's going on in the world, what you can connect with that week, links to blogs, information. So we put out a lot of info because that's our whole ethos. And then there's some deeper ways to connect as well if you want to. And we've got a YouTube channel.
Brilliant. Is it Seed Sistas?
Yeah, it's Seed Sisters. Yeah. And there's some really fun videos on there. We're looking at starting to populate that a bit more, but there's some.
I saw you doing one on white dead nettles.
Oh yeah, there's a white dead nettle video that's that's been there quite a while, but there's also some with plant characters where we dress in characters and talk about the hedgerow through the voice of the plants. It's called Voices of the Hedgerow. So
amazing. I'm going to have
those
to
are good
check
videos.
that out.
Yeah. Go and have a look.
Thank you guys so much for being here. We're going to finish with a song. What song are you going to finish with, ladies?
We'd like to finish with Nena Cherry's song Women. And that was her response to James Brown's song, which is all about men. But Nena Cherry is really inspirational to us. She was the first woman to ever go on Top of the Pops pregnant. She was heavily pregnant with her second child. And it caused a total stir. And this whole idea that pregnant women have to be kind of demure. And that was in the 80s. It was in 88. And it was totally inspirational. To us. So yeah.
Beautiful. So thank you again for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. You've been listening to me, your host, Juliette Bryant, here on Kinda Sound Radio. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.